Hello and welcome to the Ahead of the Game podcast. Today we're coming off of a great draft where there were a couple surprises, I will say, but a couple of picks that I think that went as we expected. I'm here with Alex West, Chris Filer. I'm your host, James Oxford. Alex, what's a team that you really liked, kind of where they went with their direction tonight?
Yeah, I think you start early on, and I know we're going to get into the Reed Shepherd pick. That was a great one, but I think probably the one just off the top that I really liked was Castle going to the Spurs. This is a classic case of talent over fit. Is he going to play the point guard position? We'll see. I mean, you think there's got to be a little bit of hesitancy to put a non-point guard in that role when we saw what happened this year in sort of the experimental phase. But really, when it comes right down to it, James, I mean, you got a guy who can defend, you got a guy with a big body. He's NBA ready. And you just take a shot on him and see, if he ends up being a two guard, he ends up being a two guard. If he can play the point, awesome. But they're so early in their development train that I don't think you really worry about how does this guy fit with this guy. They're going to be throwing out, as we discussed a couple of weeks back, there's going to be a weird Vassell Castle lineup. I don't know what that's going to look like, but again, you've got a couple years to kind of experiment through this thing and really kind of shape it out for something that can be, pretty exciting defensively for a young team.
Yeah, there was a point in the draft where I kind of was like, whoa, what's going on? Is Vassell out of the picture? But then I saw that Dillingham got traded. So that was an interesting little curve of the night. I made a comment to you earlier that Dillingham got traded for an 11 and 12-year-old. Uh, so I do think it's interesting that kind of how teams value certain draft picks, especially going out, 6 and 7 years, like the Spurs are
Yeah.
getting from the Timberwolves there, and protections. Obviously, do we know the exact protections on those picks yet?
31's unprotected and 30's protected. I think something like that. Maybe
One
flip.
of them's a swap.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So they only got yeah, interesting.
I mean,
I
it's
think
one of
that
those things, James. Sorry to interrupt you. It's one of those things like they will package that pick down the line. Somewhere down the line, that becomes a part of whatever the next asset they want to bring in is. And it's like I kind of like that because at 8, I don't know what you end up with there with Dillingham. I might have just rolled the dice on Dillingham or Cody Williams or somebody like that. But grabbing an asset that can become part of the big package when you get a 25-year-old Wembanyama is a pretty smart thing to do.
yeah, and it kind of goes into another trade that was recently made. The Rockets and the Nets. The Rockets traded a pick and a swap back to the Nets for I think it was 2 picks and 2 swaps. And again, it goes to evaluation on draft picks. I think the Rockets maybe are trying to fish for a Suns trade there, but that's talk for another podcast, of course. Chris, did you have any thoughts on this? Because this is a player that we talked about in our first podcast that we thought would be nice going to the Spurs.
Yeah, we nailed that back in April. That was right on the money. We didn't know quite what they were going to do with the second pick, and I don't think anyone would have projected Dillingham being the second pick and going to the Timberwolves. But as far as that Castle pick, that's been a good fit the whole time. And I think at the time we all kind of leaned Castle. It turns out I probably would have taken Reed over Castle at this point, but obviously didn't have that wasn't the situation that they had the option to go with. And so Castle is, I think, a really good fit. If it turns out he can't shoot, like you said, Alex, I mean, he's a two guard and he's a fantastic defender one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree that I think Castle next to Vassell makes a lot of sense. Castle down the line next to someone that's not Vassell could make sense. I think it really depends on what direction the Spurs are wanting to go. This isn't necessarily a direction dictator. You could say there's other teams that I think lean a lot more heavily into, hey, we're making a statement about what direction we're going to. Alex, you were talking about a team, Sacramento. Did they make kind of a direction dictation there for you tonight?
Yeah, yeah, I think the Devin Carter pick is interesting. I think it's one of those things where they've kind of punted on Davian Mitchell. We saw they really gave him some run as that like third guard, as somebody who can play defense, who can defend the perimeter, point of attack. And I think they didn't love what they got out of him. And this was kind of the last year of that. And this is an absolute indictment of where they feel their guard play was. Carter's been incredible, and he's just been on the rise as somebody who teams really liked. And I think to get him at 13 was a talent play for one, but I think most importantly, they're kind of going to turn the page on the Davion Mitchell experiment, and this is going to be what they're going to do going forward. And I think really, James, this is a team that has a lot of things to decide because they're on that cusp where you don't really want to sit, where you're pretty darn good, but you're just not that good to be in the championship picture. And I don't think this moves the needle on that. But I think this comes at a time where it looks like they're going to start making some decisions about who are we and who do we want to be a year, 2 years, 5 years from now.
To me, part of the appeal of the Devin Carter pick for the Kings is the versatility of his offensive game. He can play next to Fox, and then he can also play minutes without Fox more as a lead ball handler. Yeah, I really like the Kings draft pick there. And like you said, it does kind of give almost like hey, if you're interested in Davion Mitchell on our bench, now's the time to trade for him because it's probably a buy low time for other teams.
And to your point, like there's that versatility that Carter brings to the table with Monk coming back on the contract. You have Monk, Fox, and Carter now, and it feels like you can really play any two of those three. And I think that's a really cool thing. Now, defensively, I'm a little bit worried about the size that, if they're playing against bigger guards and have to tackle that. But, that's a problem you figure out down the line. But I really think they're going to have to start making some decisions about who they want to be. And this will give them a look, at least early in the year.
Yeah, moving on to the next team I want to talk about, my hometown team, Houston Rockets. I am so glad that they made the obvious, great pick instead of overthinking it. Me and Chris were talking earlier, just there's a lot of picks they could have made that, if you squint real hard, you can kind of talk yourself into. But at the end of the day, we can grab one of the best college three-point shooters of all time, maybe not on volume, but in terms of efficiency, obviously. It's an easy pickup. He flows nicely into pretty much everything they're already trying to build to. He is strengthening a major weakness of the team. And then when you look at the defensive end with two guys they have that are already just superb defensive playmakers in Tari Eason and Amin Thompson, and you add him to the mix on that, it's going to be a lot of transition opportunities, hopefully, where some of these other athletes like Cam Whitmore and Jalen Green can really shine. And then again, on offense, he's spacing the floor, letting Şengün get into more of his actions, and the dribble handoff options between Şengün and Reed Sheppard, very intriguing. And I do think that Reed Sheppard's offensive playmaking abilities are being undersold just a tad bit. I don't necessarily think that he has to be a primary playmaker as an outcome for it to be a good pick, but I don't necessarily think that that's out of the question either.
Yeah, the Rockets, it feels like such an obvious pick. I know you tweeted about it months ago, James, and it's felt predetermined for a long time here, just the way the board was kind of filling out. He really is just fantastic. And the clinging to Houston always kind of felt like a smokescreen. That never really made sense. Though I guess if it's going to be Kevin Durant instead of Alperen Şengün, maybe we should have rethought that. But at this point, since it is Şengün, Reed, we talk about it all the time, and everyone knows he's a really good shooter. He's a great shooter. You hear that. He's a great shooter, like an all-time level shooter. And the difference between good and great and whatever the heck Reed is really important. It's more important than it even sounds, just for the geometry of the offense, especially on a team that really can't shoot. So you just have to be so excited for Houston. I'm pumped for them. I can't wait to watch them this year.
And I also think, the trajectory that Houston's on, maybe there's some worry in the next year or so about Sheppard's ability to defend or get picked on, which I know has been a big concern. Look, this is a kid who's going to come in, who's going to put on 20 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever. He's going to eat differently. He's going to train his body differently. These guys have succeeded. This is not a death knell because he is the size he is. Now, he may not be a person who progresses to that, but the thing is there's a little bit of time to see what his body can hold to allow him not to be picked out. when it comes to these playoff defenses. And I think that's a really important part for Houston here. Now, maybe they're in the mix this year and he does get beat up a little bit, but they're also not going to win a title next year. And so him getting beat up a little bit, sometimes that's the medicine that these players need, is like you learn through experience. Anthony Edwards hit a playoff wall this year. When he comes back, he's going to have trained because he knows what the physical toll of playoffs are. That's the kind of growing experience that I think guys need. And I think this is a perfect time for Reed Sheppard and a perfect position for him to be in, to just take lumps for a year, learn what he needs to do with his body, and then come back as somebody who can at least hold up defensively.
Yeah, getting into that, learning from getting beat up. I think I feel bad that I can't remember the author's name, but there's an article just, I think, probably in December about Reed. So way back, about it was more about his mother and kind of the influence she had on his game, and they talked about the games they used to play like just one-on-one outside, and she didn't give him any like any ease, no handicap, anything like that. She went hard at him every time, and he rose to the occasion eventually. And I think that's has been kind of hammered into him. Hey, when things get hard, you just got to rise up and try harder. So I think he's going to be a perfect fit for Houston. I'm really excited about it. Chris, why don't you go ahead and throw us to the next team you'd like to talk about?
I think the Wizards front office hacked my phone because they're drafting all my favorite players. I can't explain it, but I feel like they owe me something. They drafted Sarr, who, okay, obvious, second pick in the draft. I think he's the best player in the draft. Not everyone agrees with that, but he is at the top or near the top of most draft boards. Then they go get Bub Carrington at 15. 14. They make that trade today with Denny, Denny had a great season on a terrible team and nobody watched them, but I watched them. And Denny was one of the best contracts in basketball this year. But that contract expires in 4 years and they're going to still be terrible in 4 years. So that's not, the value there is not for them. They're not going to be up against the cap in 4 years. Move that player on that contract now, get the value, and get an upside swing like Bub Carrington, who's also young, extremely young, athletic, 6'4", 6'5", plays the point guard spot, can score. He needs to learn to play with force, but he's just learning and he's already talented. He's shooting well. He's going to be a force on defense. So those are two big upside swings. And then they just traded for the Knicks pick I just saw on my phone just now. They got Keyshawn George at 24. It's like they're in my phone, man. I'm not kidding. They're drafting all my favorite guys. I had Keyshawn George. We were talking about him, and these guys were trying to talk me out of him at 9 or something when we did the mock draft. So I'm pumped for the Wizards, a team that I think has been so inept over the years. I've been calling them the absolute franchise of basketball malpractice since they signed Bradley Beal to a contract with a no trade clause. I'm so happy for them to finally be turning a new leaf. And if all of these swings miss, who cares? You're starting over next year and you're going to have the number 1 pick because you're the worst team in basketball. Even if these guys pan out and look good as young 18, 19-year-olds next year, you're still going to be the worst team in basketball. So you're still going to have the first pick in the draft. I love the complete pivot. Just do it. Lean into the tank. Trust the process. Let's roll with these young guys.
Yeah, normally this is not a route that I love. Like I'm much more in the find players who have proven basketball, like a position, a skill, a something that immediately translates. But I got to agree with you here, Chris. Like this was the time to take a big old swing, and they did. They went after guys like you said with tremendous upside, like Bub Carrington. Like, what is he? I mean, we don't know. But I think that's the kind of player you want to take in this instance is like, okay, well, let's get him in there. And again, I mean, it's kind of the Castle conversation all over again. Is he a 1? Is he a 2? How does he defend? Can he put on muscle? Like what is he going to be able to do with that length that he has? So I think that is really just a spot you want to be in. And yeah, they're going to be completely, utterly terrible next year regardless. And Alex Sarr, let's let him play 8 minutes a night at center and see if he holds up. And then, or let's let him play 8 minutes a night at small forward and see if he holds up, because this is a time to do that. And especially when we know, 25 class loaded. So there's probably a franchise guy that they're going to get a bite at the apple at next year. And this is not really that big of a deal. I mean, I know when it comes to the shelf life of NBA executives, it's a big deal. But in the grand scheme of building a great team in the future, I think the Wizards have done something pretty incredible here, and maybe somebody pans out for them.
Yeah, moving on to the next team, I'd like to touch on that I think did a really good job of addressing a weakness. Orlando drafting Tristan da Silva, who I really, really like. He's a really smart player. Doesn't project, I think, as like a star and by any reasonable projection. But they don't need that right now. They have Paolo and Franz. They have a few other guys that can step up, on occasion offensively. But they just needed someone who can consistently shoot, make a smart pass off ball, play good defense. Like he does all the things that I think any team really could use. So Tristan da Silva is a player I think that just fits in really well with a team that's poised to make a kind of a big playoff push next season.
This is a really weird niche thing from film. I think he has the best feet in this draft. Just his ability to like switch his hips and use his leverage and the way he attacks. I mean, he's slow, kind of herky jerky, but man, his feet are incredible. And I think between like that and the hope that the shooting can do something, I think you've got a really neat player there who, like you said, is kind of fitting in a positional hole for them. And so really, I think the biggest thing with him is you got to hope the shooting comes along and continues to develop just to give you the space that you need. Because the Franz situation, I mean, you hope that doesn't stick it out, but you're going to need some spacing. And Paolo, when he has space, just has this incredible ability to just get downhill in a one dribble game, in a rip and go game. I mean, he has done some really awesome stuff. And so to get a guy that you hope can develop and continue to be a 3-point shooter. What he shot like 40%, right? I'm not crazy. It's like 39.5. You hope that's going to continue to translate. And so I think that's a really great call out, James, on the Da Silva pick.
Yeah, I'm checking to see what he shot right now.
I think he was like 39 and a half on like 4.5, 4.7 attempts, something like that. I think good volume.
So his freshman year, 27% on very little attempts, and then 37, 39, and then 40, 39.4, 39.5. So
and good attempts, right? Like good numbers on that.
5 attempts this past year. So not elite volume, but good volume.
Yeah, good volume for sure. Yeah, I think that's
Absolutely.
a really good call out for them.
I think it's just kind of like a safe pick. They don't need to necessarily take like some huge upside guy that has a small chance of hitting a star upside, but relatively high chance of not turning into anything.
Yeah.
So Alex, what's another team that you think is just having a pretty fun night?
Oh, okay. Fun night is a different question than good night because this is the one that I think a lot of people are going to want to talk about, and it's the Ron Holland pick. And I got a thought on this. I don't necessarily know that I love this pick. I've been amongst the three of us, I think the biggest advocate for Holland, and the point being, I think there's elite talent if it develops correctly. And James, you said on chat so well, this was a great call out. This is good for Detroit, bad for Ron. Like this is not where you want him to be in terms of development. But I think for Detroit, this is good. You're hunting what can possibly be some of the best talent in this draft. But the interesting part about this, and this is a part that I don't necessarily agree with, and I'm not necessarily sold on you should do this. I think what they're doing is we're seeing a little bit of the Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum domino effect. We need big wings. We need wings who can get their own shots, who can run the offense. And Ausar Thompson, you're hoping that shooting develops. Cade is big. The Jaden Ivey question still hangs around, but I think they're developing what they think the identity is. Now, the question, and I want to throw this to you guys, is what happens when you develop? You're a couple of years behind on your development track, but you're following the team that is currently having success in the Boston Celtics. So, it's going to be 2 or 3 years before we see Detroit succeed. And I don't want to say copying the formula, but I certainly think they're borrowing from the playbook that Boston put together a couple of years back.
Yeah, minor correction. I was not high on the pick for Detroit as a team either. I thought it was bad for both parties involved. I thought it was bad for. I think that I actually already like the non-shooting kind of wing forward they have in Thompson. So to me, it's kind of like I'm not sure where they're going with that. But as far as following trends, yeah, I think that if you're following the trend, you're always going to be behind. You have to look for the market inefficiencies. I think the Spurs about 10 years ago did a really good job of that when they were attacking the mid-range a lot with Kawhi. That's not something a lot of teams were doing at that time. That was kind of just the very beginning of that three-point revolution, and they kind of went against the grain there, and to great effect. Obviously, now it helps when you have a guy like Kawhi to do that with, of course. But uh, obviously, you don't want to be the team that's last to the trend. If you're the team that's second, third, or fourth to the trend, it may be okay because you may be able to do it better than the first team. I don't think that Detroit's in the position to be the second, third, or fourth team to try that trend. So I am not super high on them. Chris, what do you think about Detroit there, though?
Yeah, I'm with you, James. I'm hesitant on all fronts here. I might be the lowest on Ron of the three of us. I'm not sure. James and I are neither one of us is that crazy about Ron, but I'm probably the lowest, I would guess, from our conversations. And Detroit, I get the vision in the big wings who can handle. I mean, they're taking lots of bites at the apple, and that's important. And in the draft, which we all like to think we know everything, a lot of it is kind of you're just shooting shots, and you hope you hit some of them. So I get taking lots of shots at it. And the Ron Holland fit is going to make a lot more sense when they start clearing out some of these guys. They have too many guys who can't shoot, and it's not feasible. It seems like maybe they're going to be stuck with it for a second straight year, which I think is a wreck. But because it's hard to evaluate in this kind of situation, it's hard to evaluate anybody in this kind of situation. But I do think that I I think they've only got Cade. It's still just Cade. And because I'm not crazy about Ivy, I don't know that there's any other guys who can shoot, and they're gonna have to pick somebody. A couple podcasts ago, I talked about how Amen is maybe the player I've seen. As much as I love Amen, he's the player I've seen who I think is the least likely to develop shooting. Well, Asar is the same thing. It's practically a tie. Like Asar can't shoot. It's almost never going to happen. I'd bet my house on it practically. So it's just a situation where you got Duran, you got Asar, now you got Holland, who's a better shooting prospect than those guys, of course, but it's still not great. And at some point, you got to put something around Cade. And this just wouldn't have been my guy here. But it'll make more sense when we see what they start to clear out. They're going to have to start clearing guys out at some point.
So I do think on that point, Chris, I do think there is some argument that you made that kind of skews in favor of Ron. And I know like we can disagree about the prospect because you're right, the shooting is scary. But like I think every team looks themselves in the mirror, gets up in the morning and points at themselves in the mirror and says, "You can develop players, you can do this." And I think that's what Detroit kind of has like. They have to buy into their own idea. Like they maybe psyching themselves up to develop Ron Holland. But I think the point of what you said is they only have Cade. Right. And so my concern at 5 is how do you get the most upside out of what you got? And yeah, I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. But when I'm looking at this draft, that's what I'm seeing is like Ron Holland, to me, has the physical tools to be an impact player. And we have to believe, we have to get up and look ourselves in the mirror and go, yes, we can fix the shooting. Because otherwise, I mean, what are you even doing? And so I think yes, I agree with your point. And yes, this will probably be a terrible team again. So they'll get another bite at the apple in 25. But to me, like there's a little bit of like taking solace in similar to what you said earlier. It's like, I mean, with Washington, they're going to be bad. So whatever, let's give it a shot. And to me, like this is the kind of whatever pick is like, well, we see the physical tools. Maybe he develops, maybe he doesn't. But yeah, they're going to have to clean some guys out of there. And I think the cleaning has started with the Wiseman being excised and all those kinds of things. And so hopefully we can see something there. But to me, it's like, well, we got to take a shot at somebody.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about the Wiseman adventure. Wiseman and
Yeah.
Bagley.
Yeah, Wiseman and Bagley. And I think both of them will be moved on. We'll still have Stu and Graham, but
The Wizards were the malpractice team, and it's rapidly becoming Detroit.
yeah. Yeah.
So I was looking over teams that I like as far as what they've done tonight, and another team that I think goes to what you were talking about, Alex, with the Kings and them picking a player that kind of signals to another player, hey, maybe you need to put your house on the market. Portland Trailblazers drafting Donovan Clingan. Obviously, they have DeAndre Ayton and Robert Williams. I would assume, and this is zero, obviously, inside information, that of the two, assuming health, they would like to keep Robert Williams over DeAndre Ayton. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's just
that's got to be the way it is. I mean, it just
Yeah.
like Ayton is just not what they wanted. I mean, he just didn't become what they thought he could be. It was a shot, but it didn't work. I think that's got to be the way to go with this. Anyway, sorry.
No, you're good. Absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it. Obviously, Ayton is not the player they thought he was going to be. He's exactly the player I thought he was going to be.
Yes, well documented, by the way. You called that out. I think it may have been like January of the year he got drafted. And I remember we watched that Buffalo game where they got beat in the tournament, and you're like, this dude just doesn't have it. So I will go to bat for James on that one, guys. He was way ahead of the game on Ayton.
He's just a step slow, like not even a whole step. It's just like a quarter step slow, but that makes all the difference at the NBA level.
I really like the trade. We talked about this on the other side, the Avdia trade. I really like this for Portland to just grab a hold of a guy who can do some things, who has some positional versatility, who's on a fantastic contract and young, 23. I mean, just still very, very much an unfinished product. I think that's awesome. And I think to grab Clingan is like, man, now you got some really fun tools. They're not going to be good, but you got some really fun things to put around Scoot. And I think you get to start. There are teams that I worry, like Detroit, like Washington. They don't have the basis to start the assessment because there are too many factors that are outside of that, where you don't really have the talent, or you don't have the coaching, or you don't have the second piece, or whatever. I think Portland just did a thing to hit that floor where it's like, okay, now we can start to see who the guys are going to be. And I think that's fun. And I think Clingan's a great pick. I mean, I know there was some buzz with him up and down the boards, like as high as one, but I think he's going to do a lot of things that he held his own against Edey. He can defend a little bit out on the perimeter. He can do this. He can do that. I think he's going to be a player that people that Portland is going to like having. It is really like the end on that. And then what else can you do? I mean, maybe that's just the overarching theme of the evening is at some point, if a draft is not what you think it's going to be, you have to decide we're going to do something, and getting Avdia and then drafting Clingan, that's something.
Yeah, they're in a different position than Washington is, for instance. When we were talking about Washington, Washington's gotten nothing. I mean, they are starting from scratch today. So Portland, they've got lots of guys. Scoot's young, but Simons is still on the team. Jeremy Grant's still on the team. Ayton isn't great, but he's an NBA player. He's a starter level-ish player. And Rob Williams is a good player. They have lots of guys. And, Shaedon Sharpe, however you feel about him, even some of the first year guys last year were coming in and contributing. So they have actual players that can contribute to winning right now. I don't expect them to make the playoffs or something this year, but so can Clingan. Clingan's going to walk in the door and help them with that.
So I do want to point out that the last mock we did, we had Ryan Dunn going to the Denver Nuggets. And I don't know if the trade or the pick has been traded because I'm not looking at Twitter right now.
It seems like it's been traded.
But I'm about to say, did we call that pick right? Because that was a pick I'd love to fit for.
Yeah,
man, that Ryan Dunn to Denver would have been fun. His cutting next to Jokic would have been.
Trying to get some details on that, but it looks like it's been traded, but I'm not 100% on that.
Utah just got Isaiah Collier.
So it seems like Phoenix ended up with Ryan Dunn somehow. I don't know the details on that, but it seems like Phoenix was the one who snatched him up. Maybe that was part of the swap for 22, was the pick at 28.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that could have been the swap there. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so while we're on this little tangent here, outside of the lottery, what was a move you felt strongly about, James? I want to throw this one to you to start with. Like, not maybe it can be good, maybe it can be bad, but what is a move you felt kind of strongly about outside the lottery?
Okay, and maybe I should leave this for Chris. So Chris, actually, you go first, Chris, because I don't want to take the team that I think you're going to pick here.
I can see you guys smiling.
Well, I phrased it carefully. I said which way, good or bad.
He did. That's why I'm deferring to Chris here.
Yeah.
It's so funny because I feel differently than you both about Dalton Connect, I think. And I'm an LA guy. I grew up a Laker fan. So I am so low on Dalton Connect. It's almost hard to explain compared to consensus. And I couldn't have face palmed harder. I'm surprised you can't see the red mark on my face right now, an hour later. So I'm just disappointed. I think he'd maybe be a better fit somewhere else, but his primary skill is scoring, not shooting. He's a awfully good shooter, but I'm so concerned about it because he's not a great shooter. He's a mid 70s free throw shooter. He's high 30s from 3-point range, I believe, at the end of the season. And he takes not all the easiest shots. He's a very talented scorer. But I'm worried that he's never going to be an advantage creator at the NBA level. I don't think he's a very good passer. I think he's okay, but I don't think he's a very good passer. He has zero wiggle. And I don't think he's going to contribute in the NBA as a defender at any, like probably even an average level. And so you're left with a guy in the NBA who's a scorer and not a great shooter playing around a team that already has Anthony Davis, LeBron, and Austin Reeves, who I'd rather have the ball in their hands anyways. It's just and the track record of guys this old that do well in the NBA is just, when they're drafted at this age, it's just not great. And so I'm disappointed. I think I would have rather taken somebody like a Kaishan George or someone with a little more defensive uh, punch, but I recognize that I'm different than consensus on this point.
I think there's one thing about this that I was only considered it while you were talking because you said a lot of really great things about Connect and like what he does and what he doesn't do. But one thing I think about Connect is like there's a floor there that's playable. And we don't know if it's great, we don't know what it is, but like he is a guy who's going to be enticing enough to get on the floor and to get minutes. And one thing I just thought of is okay, well, if the Lakers are putting together a package, Dalton Connect may be a sexy enough name to be part of a package that makes you feel like, oh, okay, well, we could go get a such and such because Connect is part of what's coming back. And I think there's a little bit of like Hood Shafino, like malaise over that, where it's like, well, he wasn't quite sexy enough for us to go hunting, go big game hunting. Maybe that's a part of the thought process. I mean, look, personally, I like it. I think you got a guy here who's got some of the best scoring pop in this draft, and there's a place for guys like a Max Struess and these guys who can shoot who aren't great defenders. I was about to say the Duncan Robinson again. So it's just going to be like Miami Heat players who like cycle through that system. But I mean, I think there's a place for a guy like that. Now he's not the shooter, to your point, Chris, that those guys are, but he could be. He could develop into that. And so I like the pick, but I think also there may be some it factor of if they are going big game hunting, which I think you have to think they are at this point with a new coach and LeBron in year 21. Nothing to me says prime like year 21 for your best player. But I think that's what they're going to do. And so maybe that's something. I don't know.
I think you're right about that. I'd feel more confident about the big game hunting if he didn't just drop to 17 in the draft.
True. Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying. And to be clear, I think 17 for Connect is not crazy. I think this is the range that even I would have been okay starting to draft him in. I don't love the fit with the Lakers because I think there's all kinds of scoring on the Lakers already. I'm not a D'Angelo Russell guy really, but I mean that's the only thing we have, I would say, in abundance is scorers.
Right.
So I think this is just not a fit that I love for this team, and it happens to be my team.
So,
All right.
I was gonna say to me, I think it's kind of obvious who made this pick, and I was telling you all about this earlier. This just seems like an obvious LeBron James pick.
It does.
I mean, like when he's had like the most success in his career, he's had a guy who can come off movement shooting.
Yeah,
Mike Miller, Kyle Korver were integral parts of some of his championship teams, and to me, it's just like he probably saw a connection. He's like, hey, this is a dude that I know can play next to me, at least offensively. I think that Chris, you have valid concerns about the defensive side and what he brings on that side of the ball. But to me, this is just clearly like a LeBron James pick. Like,
Probably right.
and I think there's a little bit of like we saw Sam Hauser hold up well enough in the NBA Finals that you can talk yourself into something like that. Or it's like, oh, I watched the Celtics 50, 60 times this year. Teams hunted this guy. They thought, man, when Sam Hauser's on the floor, we're going to hunt him. That was a bad idea all the time. And I think if you're in the realm of like talking yourself into something with Connect, which I'm not saying this is what he is, but I think if you get into that idea of like, okay, well, he could be a not bad defender, that's kind of where you look at the mold for what you hope he turns into. James, what about you, your non-lottery move where you have big feelings about it?
All right, so I'm glad you said non-lottery because I'm kind of skating the line here. But the Miami Heat's pick of Khalil Ware, I have some major worries about kind of whether his stats actually have impact behind them or whether they're more empty stats. And it's interesting to me that I know that they didn't actually pick Hassan Whiteside, but they were kind of where Hassan Whiteside kind of took off with his career and was kind of the poster boy for empty stats for quite a while. And then Christian Wood kind of took over the reign of empty stats from Hassan Whiteside. And so it's just interesting to me that kind of, and I don't know for sure that that's where Khalil Ware is, but I am worried. And I have, as you say, strong worries about where he's at. And I know people say, hey, Miami Heat culture fixes a lot of stuff with players. But they had that same culture when Hassan Whiteside was there. Not every single player can be fixed, but maybe that's unfair of me. It's just a worry that I have with them.
Well, I think. Chris, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So we were talking about DeAndre Ayton just a little while ago, and your feel on him. I feel the same way when I watch Khalil Ware. It's a lot of incredible athleticism. He makes huge plays sometimes, and there's potential. Like there's obviously potential. He's got a ton of physical gifts and he's got good hands and sometimes it looks awesome, but then he has games where it's like no one's home. It's insane. It's so DeAndre Ayton eerie. I mean, it reminds me just of like when I used to watch him as a prospect. It's surreal. So it's absolutely right on the money for what we were just talking about. And you can go ahead, Alan. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I think there's an important distinction to what you said is that you're not drafting him at 2. You're getting him at 15. And you're looking at 2 problems here. I think the 2 biggest problems, if you made a list of pros and cons of Khalil Ware, the 2 biggest cons are consistency, motor. Those are the questions that you're going to have. Again, going back to this like hammering at home, teams got to believe in themselves. The Miami Heat have proven they can get consistency and motor out of guys who haven't in other places. Like Max Strus played for the Celtics and kind of found his own as a Miami Heat, kind of got himself into game shape and got a little bit more consistency, developed the ability to dribble. But, so I think if you're the Heat and you're looking at this, you're going, hey, man, we've done this before. And, like James said, like, what is Heat culture? We could spend 3 weeks dissecting that. But at the end of the day, you drafted a guy at 15. And maybe if our ability to fix consistency and motor are the biggest things we've got going for us as an organization, we can fix this guy with, as you said, just incredible gifts. I mean, does crazy things that you're not going to see very often in this draft. And so I don't know how I feel about it. I'm just playing devil's advocate, I guess. But I think that's worth mentioning to throw up there that Miami's going to, bet on themselves.
Yeah, one more team that I kind of want to talk about just real quickly. They did make the trade that we talked about earlier, the Suns and Nuggets. The Nuggets picking up DaRon Holmes there. I think it's interesting because it kind of gives the Nuggets potentially an answer to what the Timberwolves just threw at them. I think maybe that's possibly the direction they were going in. Holmes could play next to Jokic, conceivably. He wasn't like a just straight knockdown 3-point shooter, but there's potential there for him to play the 4 in a big front court lineup next to Jokic and then kind of offset that advantage Minnie had against them.
Yeah, I mean, I think size is the big question for them is like they never really found that second center. I mean, and like I think there were times where, in the playoffs where they went to Aaron Gordon at the 5, and like that's not really where you want to be playing. It can be where you are if you're playing Dallas, or it can be where you are if you're playing Boston, but it's not really where you want to be for those 4-minute stretches when you're playing Minnesota. I think they've run some guys through the gamut there, and they haven't figured it out yet. My question about DaRon Holmes is like he has been excellent at things that I don't think Denver's game is like this sort of Princeton point away series. Get Jokic at the top, let him operate out of the slot. Deron Holmes is a really great pick and roll finisher. So like sort of figuring those two things out is like I think something they're going to have to sort of settle in on and see like what is he going to do. But the size and the sort of grit that he's going to bring is going to be interesting, and I think like a worthwhile gamble. Like if the trade up, I don't know what all the details were, but obviously this was a guy they had high on their board because they moved up 6 spots to get him.
Are there any other teams that y'all kind of want to touch on before we wrap up here?
I do just want to quickly say that I can't think of a time where we have the three of us talked about Risa to the Hawks. So maybe just like a moment on the first pick of the draft.
Yeah, true. Good point.
Because I think almost every time we talked about this, they either didn't have the first pick yet or we were pretty locked in on Sarr there. So how do you guys feel about Risa being the number one pick and then going to the Hawks?
I talk about you don't always have to swing for best player available, especially in a draft like this. But it does feel almost like they went too safe, given it's the number one pick. I don't know. I think a lot of people say that about Shepard. Also, is he like too safe of a pick for number three? At number one, I don't think there's much difference in terms of expectations necessarily, but I don't see the potential upside with Reese Shea in terms of maybe Reed doesn't have a massive upside in terms of on ball offense. Reese Shea, I think, has zero chance at it. So it's a little bit good.
Oh, sorry. I think my biggest concern with Reese Shea is that I don't know what it means. Like, okay, I think in a normal draft, you look at a Cade Cunningham or a Zion Williamson or I'm not even talking about like a top tier Wembanyama or Luka pick. They're in that like elite talent level, but like a pretty good number one pick. That usually defines what happens with the team. It's like, where are we going? Who we're going to build around Kyrie, or we're going to build around Zion, or we're going to do this. I think what concerns me about this pick is it does not spell out a direction of what comes next. Because like, are you jazzed about the idea of like, man, we're going to get Reese Shea out there with DeAndre Hunter and Trae Young and DeJounte Murray and Clint Capella? Like, what is that? That's 45 wins on a good day in a bad Eastern Conference. Like, I'm not jazzed about that. But then if we go the other way, it's like, ooh, do we want to build around Zachary Reese-Shea? And I think of all the three of us, I'm the highest on him. And even still, I'm like, ooh, that's not where I want to be as an organization in a what is not necessarily a overly overwhelmingly supportive market for an NBA team when they're bad. And I think that is another thing that like draws concerns here is like Atlanta can't really afford to be bad for a long time. And so the Reese Shea pick, like, where are we going?
Yeah, I have come around a little bit on Reese Shea. I do think he's good. I think he's going to make it as he's probably going to be a good, solid NBA player for a long time. I worry that this pick is more, they're thinking, what if we had a 6'9" wing who was really good on ball and off ball and can really shoot and moves off the ball well, and while he's okay at some of that stuff, and I think he's a good ball mover, I'm not sure that's what he is. So I'm worried that they're projecting the type of player more than they're projecting Reese Shea himself as a fit here on this team. And I think at the beginning of the year, Alex, you talked about that was a problem you guys had with Bagley in the past, when you were projecting more the prospect type over the player himself. And I kind of worry that that's what's happening in this particular situation.
Yeah, it's just, you're right. That's exactly what they want this guy to be that guy. And I don't know that he is that guy. I think the movement shooting is there. I think the footwork is clean. So I think that probably is what brings me a little bit higher on the table. I worry about the physical tools a little bit. And I worry about the shooting slump that like, what's that going to be? Is that going to carry over? And hopefully he's going to get a little bit of work between now and then to figure that out. But yeah, this is going to be one of those things where If the Hawks decide to blow it up tomorrow, I'm not shocked, but I'm a little bit concerned on what it becomes. Or if you go into the season, maybe that's actually the way to go here is to take your pick of the Trae Young DeJounte Murray duo and then just kind of run this thing back and be a 42 win team or a 39 win team and be a little bit better than what you're going to be, because the idea of making a full on rebuild, maybe you're gunning for Ace Bailey or Cooper Flag or whatever, and you're looking towards 25. But I don't know. It's you got gifted this, and James, to your point, I feel like maybe they went a little too safe in the pocket on what they were trying to achieve here.
And just so we can say we covered the entire top five, Alex Sarr to the Wizards. I know we kind of talked about it a little bit with Chris talking about how they were stealing his board, but we didn't really get into much on Alex Sarr. So I do want to say that I'm just not super high on him in terms of a lot of situations, but for this situation where they can let him get a lot of possessions, again, they're starting from scratch, so he can just have a lot of possessions where they can say, hey, let's figure out what you can do. Kind of like what the Spurs did with Wemby this year. It's going to be to a lot less impact than what the Spurs got with Wemby this year, doing that strategy with Sarr, but it's at least worth seeing what he's about. I worry, does he have enough kind of moves in his bag to really create offense off the dribble? To me, when I was watching film on him, it was a lot of, I'm going to try to just go over the guy because I'm a little bit taller than him. There's going to be instances where that's not the case in the NBA, and it's not going to turn out great for him. He definitely needs to work on the roll pop aspect of his game, but I don't know that. Actually, I take that back. They have some point guards that they can actually run some good pick and roll with him, so he will get some run on that also. But as far as excitement about the pick, I'm not super excited about it, but as I think it's the right pick for them because they have to take a chance. It is the home run swing in the draft.
I think my concern about Sarr is I don't love his feel for the game. I think that's really what there's every top 5 player in this draft or every top 8 player, because God knows what the top 5 was going to be until like 10 minutes after it happened. Had that one thing that you just never could get past. And sometimes you couldn't even put your finger on it where you're like, what is it? And I think over the last week or so, the more Sarr I watched, the more I was like, I don't love your understanding of where you think you need to be. And that's a really big thing for me because it's one of those things that I don't think you really can teach. I think guys know or they don't know. I think your feel for the game improves, but I think you kind of fall within that same tier that you start in. So, if you're good, you can go maybe up to great, but you're not going to go from what I think is subpar for Alex Sarr to incredible guy with all this vision and understanding of the greater picture of the court at any given time. And so I don't want to make any sort of comp, but I think that in terms of drafting a player, that's one of the things that worries me most. And so if we're going to talk about Sarr, great upside pick, great thing. But I think the thing I want to keep an eye on is can he figure out how to play and where to position his body and how to use the tools? Because in NBL, you can be a half step out of place, and that physical gift, physical tools are basically just the bar. It's how much are you out of place? Okay, well, I can recover with this physical tools. In the NBA, it's not that half step closes up. And so there's got to be something there. And I think early on, that's really what I want to focus in on him and see what he can do.
Yeah. So if there's no other teams that we want to go ahead and talk about, last call.
I'm good.
No?
Good,
All right, great. This was the draft review for the first round on the Ahead of the Game podcast. Thank you for watching, following along with us. If you have any topics or teams you'd like us to talk about, please leave that in the comments. We can go ahead and maybe have an episode next week where we talk about, all the comments that were hopefully left on the video. And please make sure to also share that out. We're really trying to build something big here, and all the support we can get from y'all helps a ton. And thank you and have a great night.